All right. We went a little long in the plenary, so I'm going to just start in a couple minutes, give some people time to get a glass of water or a beer or any other form of refreshment and take a little refreshment break, and we'll start up in the next few minutes.
Rich, is this B that we're on?
This is B. The first session will be treasurer training.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And hopefully our trainer pops on, who should be John Tabor. Hey, John. Let's just give a minute for a couple more people to log on that might want to. The plenary went right till 2.
Sounds good. Can you hear me okay?
All right, John, I think it's fair to say we should start. We've got 21 folks on the line.
Fair enough. I like that walk-up music. That's
You're
pretty
welcome.
good. It's Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls.
Yeah,
We're all
exactly.
little sports starved right now at the moment. So that was good. Some good memories there. So, and I'm not even from Chicago. So,
Yeah.
all right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Tabor. I'm the incoming district treasurer for 20 and 21. Also past president of Orange Park Sunrise, and also incoming is the assistant governor, year 1 for area 3. Rich is going to be, he's the facilitator, I think he's still there. Yeah, there he is. And got the license. So he's going to kind of be a traffic cop this afternoon. Thanks for joining. A couple of quick housekeeping issues. If you could, please keep your audio on mute. If you have anything to say, you can hit the space bar, actually, and that will unmute you. There also is down in the bottom, sort of to the right-hand side of the screen, a little figure there where you can click on it and raise your hand, or you can clap if you want to. I don't expect much of that, but feel free to stick your hand up. Obviously, you're familiar with the chat box as well, and hopefully I think Rich is going to be monitoring that for me. So shouldn't be any questions about any of that. So with that, let me go ahead and bring up the presentation. All right, so presumably you're here because you're coming in as your club treasurer. If you're not here for that reason, I'm sure there are some more interesting and exciting presentations going on in some of the other rooms. But Anyway, having said that, let's just go through this. We've got 50 minutes. There's a fair amount of material here. Don't be shy. If you have any questions, we can stop along the way. Like I said, raise your hand or go ahead and just give me the shout out. But you know, we're going to talk about briefly some of your responsibilities in a broad sense, and then get down into a little bit of the weeds, and then hopefully give you some information for this new role that you've taken on. It's one of the more complicated roles, obviously, within the administration of your club. One thing I would tell you too is if you're not starting the transition for your role, you should be thinking about doing that now. Typically in the Rotary year, by May 1st, you should have started to sit with your predecessor and starting to work through the details, especially important in this particular role, and then really be prepared to take over in the month of June, so that you can see all of the activities for June, closing out the year, and be ready to kind of hit the ground running at the beginning of the Rotary year on July 1st. So some of these are going to be fairly self-evident, right? You're the treasurer, you're the person who basically has responsibility, fiduciary responsibility for the funds of the club. There's a number of different models for that. Some clubs may actually use an outside CPA. Some clubs may have a paid staff person or a paid bookkeeper, and other clubs, obviously, in your role, you get to kind of do it all. So obviously, that's kind of number one. You got to bill, you got to collect dues. That's the first thing. You got to have money coming in before you can have money going out. I don't know if everybody does this in a formalized way, but I would encourage you to actually put together a budget, work with your board. That is something you should be doing right now. And that board, the board should be voting on and adopting that budget. Ideally, in your June meeting, if you can pull it off. Certainly don't want that to go into July. You certainly don't want to be halfway into the Rotary year and not really know, your committees don't know, how much do they have to spend. We don't have a sense for, are we, behind, are we ahead, where are we? There is some interaction, obviously, with the district and the Rotary Foundation. We'll talk a little bit about the details of that. Coordinating with your club secretary is going to be very important because a lot of your numbers are going to be driven off of your membership numbers. So it's going to be important that you have those all that data updated and current. And then obviously what you're going through right now, you're working with your predecessor. You're going to be preparing your successor to take over, unless you enjoy the job so much that you want to keep doing it for a while. I don't know if anybody is in that boat. All right, so you need to kind of understand these things going into it. How are your bank accounts set up? Seems fairly obviously, although that has gotten more complicated as banks and credit unions have had to adopt more stringent requirements in terms of know their customer and all these different regulations now that they have to deal with. So usually what this involves is having some kind of a letter of authorization from your board, probably some kind of an annual meeting minutes where your directors have been adopted. So there is something in writing to tell the institution these are the people who are authorized to either access information or to write checks on the accounts. And then they may, at least initially, require that you have a copy of your annual meeting minutes that you print out from SunBiz from the state of Florida. And initially, you might even have to go find your articles of incorporation, that sort of thing. So there is a little bit more work involved in doing that now, which is a bit more complicated than it was even just a couple of years ago. And if we have any questions about any of that, certainly we'll talk about where you go for help with resources later on. You need to understand, how are your members getting billed and how do they pay? That used to be, you'd send out an invoice that, somebody would go to the post office box, you'd cash all the checks. Now I can tell you there's methods that make it and could make your job potentially easier. Apple Pay and Quicken and credit, to take credit cards and those sorts of things. You really need to understand what all those options are and to make sure that you have them all straight. Because if you allow for 3 or 4, whatever, multiple ways of collecting your dues, then you're going to want to make sure you keep track of those. If there's additional expenses associated with it, club needs to make a decision as to whether you're going to pass those costs on or not to your individual members. If your club has any debt, you obviously need to know what your obligations are for that. What is the budget? We just talked about that. Do you have specific funds designated for committees? And we're going to talk about kind of how to keep all these things straight, but these are things that you need to understand. What kind of an accounting system do you use? Hopefully we're not using green ledger paper anymore. Maybe we're using Excel spreadsheets. I would suggest a lot of people use Quicken, or again, you may have some kind of an outside arrangement with a bookkeeper or a CPA. We're also going to talk about this, but you need to understand within your own club, what kind of obligations do you have for regular filing? There are annual, semi-annual, quarterly filings that all have to take place. We are actually going to get into a little bit of detail on those. Okay. I don't see any hands up. I'm just going to keep plowing through, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end for anything else. All right, so let's talk about budgeting generally. This is your numeric financial representation of what your plans are for the club. You know, it goes without saying that having a good plan should be a good roadmap for success. Get your board of directors, your committee chairs involved in that budget process early on. So again, you're setting the right expectations for folks, and that they know they have, you know, how much they have to spend on their either any specific committee work, just the operations of the club itself from week to week, month to month, or if you have any events or significant kinds of projects, any grants, any of those kinds of things. You need to know ahead of time what the expectations are for those, and then how you're going to deal with potentially any shortfalls. Dealing with surpluses, I've found.
Hey, John.
Problem. Yes, sir.
Jim Prince has a question, I believe.
Okay, go ahead. What's the question?
My question had been whether or not you're going to send us a copy of this presentation.
Yeah, we can get it to you.
Yeah, if you'll just,
Sure.
that'd be nice.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Absolutely.
it is recorded as well, so the actual meeting can be viewed as well. Again, if you want to go to a certain spot on it, the recording will be available.
Thank you.
You bet. Obviously, as you go on throughout the year, you know, part of your responsibility, you know, maybe not one of the more pleasurable aspects of it is, you know, holding folks accountable for the budgets that they have related to their areas of responsibility. Especially when it comes to anything, again, we're going to talk about this a couple of different times throughout, but when you have funds that are designated for specific purposes, and this typically relates to charitable stuff, and that's going to be real important as we're going to talk about briefly. Keep these things separate. Some folks, you know, if it's sufficiently large enough project, you may want to consider getting separate bank accounts for that project. I think Art McQueen will tell you, if you're doing a grant of any kind, it is always advisable to go get a separate bank account for that project. If nothing else, on your spreadsheet or your books, your Quicken, et cetera, is to have these activities set up separately. And if you have designated funds, you know where they're, you know, coming in, and they're being separated on your financials. And then you have corresponding expense lines for those as they go out. You know, inventory activities, I don't know if folks, you know, sell materials. If you have anything you have to keep track of, obviously cash flow, very important because you got to pay the bills. Be conservative, kind of goes without saying. Plan for contingencies. You know, our club, quite a few years ago, after some surprises, you know, set aside a certain amount of money every year and have gone ahead and just added to that. Nothing wrong with having a little bit of cushion built in. All right, budgeting continued. Plan for a surplus at the end of the year, or certainly plan for a you know, a balanced budget. Make sure your board signs off on the budget. Make sure that they're all on board. Not a bad idea, actually. At some point, I think there's a few of us that are still out there doing club assemblies, and have the without going into it line by line, obviously. But make sure your club is aware of kind of what the expectations are. Make sure they know, you know, what is it that you're charging them for on their quarterly bill. and make sure that they understand what the club priorities are from a financial standpoint. And then what kind of the expectations are going to be for funding. Are we going outside for sponsorship? Are we raising money internally? Are we selling product? You know, what is it that we're doing to help us kind of meet those financial obligations? Okay, the invoice itself. This will come from Patty Chapman. Will send twice a year. They come by email. It's one page. This is where it is critical that your secretary is keeping your membership information current. Honorary members or people that have left the club, you know, whatever status that they're on, because once that information is transmitted at the cutoff, there is no way to go back and change it. So that's why I say it's just critical that you make sure that your secretary is good on the numbers and that they're done in time, so that when these invoices get cut. But you're going to get that invoice in January and July. You can pay it by credit card, you can pay it by check. I think you still can, but they really encourage you to pay by credit card if you can. That's what the invoice looks like, in case nobody's ever seen one. But that's the key to remember here out about all of this is once it's cut, you can't change it, okay? Talking about kind of good stewardship of the funds themselves, again, making sure that your membership numbers are accurate is really important. You're budgeting, hopefully, and in those dues, you've got plans for either social activities or different things that you're doing. Usually, if you're collecting money for meals, this is where this can get real tricky, because you got to make sure if you're paying out typically in advance, or maybe at the end of a month, but you're not charging the dues until, you know, the next quarter. You want to make sure that your membership numbers are in line with that. If you have donations, you want to make sure that you keep track of these and understand whether these are restricted funds or whether these are unrestricted funds. This raises another issue, and we'll just touch on it briefly, but some clubs, including ours, have actually gone to setting up a separate account, a 501c3, and I think we'll talk about the differences of that, where if you're soliciting donations that folks are expecting to be able to take a tax write-off for, then that is a way to facilitate those donations. But again, they're kept separate and they're accounted for in a way that recognizes this is what the expectation was for those funds. Understand your money raised from your club activities. Hopefully when you went into your budget, you had an understanding of, well, here's this certain thing that we're going to do. We're going to have a golf tournament, or, you know, in our club, we do a football pool every year. You know, you have happy dollars, you have things like that, money raised from these activities, and you kind of have a plan based around what you're going to use those for. Rotary Foundation pass-throughs are also very important that you keep track of those separately. These are typically your either your RI dues and your district dues that you're collecting from your members and then you're paying, but this could also be your dues that your donations, not dues, that are going to the Rotary Foundation for either you know, your Paul Harris contributions to either Polio Plus or to the annual fund, and these are just strictly pass-throughs. So we send, in our club, we send those dollars to Rotary International on a quarterly basis, and every one of our members is a sustaining member. So we are billing each member $25 a quarter, and we make sure that those dollars go to RI at the end of that quarter. That's all separated in our financials, and we know how much has been collected, and we send that out accordingly. Those are your foundation pass-throughs. Grants we talked about as well. This, you know, I would tell you, you got to keep this in a lockbox. It's really important, if anybody's been through a grant, that you know exactly what, you know, you're accounting for every dollar that's there. And that's why a lot of clubs will actually just go ahead and set up a separate bank account with a different set of books associated to those grants. Sponsorships funds, the same sort of thing. If they are for a particular event or a particular effort, again, you want to keep track of those and keep them in a separate account. All right, on the expense, also, what did we do here? Okay. just talking about your different types of expenses. We talked about district and RI dues payments, charitable expenses. This is the other side of the ledger. If you have, office supplies or equipment that you use, maybe you pay someone to help, club administration efforts, and you help with some of their costs. Everybody's got meeting expenses of some type, promotional expenses, committee expenses. One of the things that you want to make sure you're careful about is collecting receipts for everything. So when somebody's looking for reimbursement, particularly an individual, make sure you get receipts. This is where the real issue of what is the ultimate destination for these funds? Were they derived from someone who's expecting a tax deduction? And then are you paying them out of a charity? And that's your 501c3. The club itself is a C4, I believe. So it's a little different form and a little different tax treatment. But typically you want to make sure, are these expenses they're operating club expenses, or are they tax, with the C3, tax exempt, charitable types of expenses. There's another little caveat in here to be aware of when you're talking about charitable related expenses. And this is kind of something that our CPA, who is a member of our club, beats us up over on a regular basis. Is typically you do not want to be making payments out of your charitable account to an individual unless there's a very clear chain of expenses associated with that reimbursement, that so you have receipts for everything that that person did on behalf of what that endeavor was. If not, and if they don't provide you the receipts, then you're going to have to 1099 that individual. And now the rule says it's over $600, but typically we hold that out there a little bit as a club and say, hey, look, and I don't mean a club, I mean a club that it says, look, if you don't provide us all the receipts for what we've given you for this effort, then we're going to have to 1099 you for the difference. Because that's how you could get your C3 in trouble if you don't follow that. The other thing that we've done, and again, it requires an additional layer of being very, very diligent about kind of comings and goings, because this is where it can get screwed up pretty quick. We use a credit card now pretty much for everything. And so we have started running all the expenses through the club pretty much on an American Express that we get air miles from. And we have successfully used the air miles on that to send our president to international convention every year. And we saved a bunch of money sending our president to Hamburg this last year. And we sent it pretty much on all miles that we had collected while we, from club activities run through the credit card. Got to have somebody who really knows then how to work that system. And you also have to have it tight. We have basically two people that have access to that. Our foundation chair, because all of those RI expenses are paid by credit card. And then we have, basically someone, either the treasurer or someone who kind of manages all of that. But anyway, the credit card can be a blessing or a curse. You can really help streamline what you're doing, but at the same time, it can get out of control pretty quickly if you don't have tight control over making sure that all those receipts are collected. Some clubs, I believe, have either employees, they may hire a full-time administrator, part-time administrator, or you may have someone that you're paying as a subcontractor. Be aware that there is some additional complexity associated with this. If you have a paid employee, now your club is an employer and has to file all of the forms that you see there. So you've got to give them a W-2, you've got to file a quarterly tax return. That Florida RT6 is the state unemployment that you have to file. If you're paying someone as a contractor, again, we talked about if they're getting at least $600, which also includes rent, services, et cetera, anything associated with that, you've got to send them a 1099. You've got to make sure you got W-9. It's not a bad habit to be in anyway. If you're using someone regularly for a project or an event or something that the club's doing on a regular basis, and you're paying them quite a bit of money, kind of good, good stewardship of that would say, make sure you have a W-9 on file from that individual so you know what their social security number or tax ID number is, and then make sure that you 1099 them for the activities that are coming through the club. All right, this is just a little bit of a schedule here for just to kind of remind you, again, our club actually started sending out the billing a couple of weeks before the beginning of the quarter. You probably, as the treasurer, get involved in that first 30, 45 days of kind of reminding people maybe they have not paid their dues, or certainly making them aware of how convenient because of your credit card payment or Apple Pay or Venmo or whatever it is that you're using. Again, I might suggest to you that the president actually, or someone like the president-elect, gets involved when someone is in danger of becoming a quarter past due in their dues. And that's also kind of a danger sign, potentially, that you may have someone who is marginally associated with your club and maybe kind of making that decision to kind of move on. So this is going to be important. It's important not only for the health of the club, but also from a financial standpoint and your primary responsibility, because the club has often kind of paid out for those meals, or they paid out for those expenses associated with the other part of the dues. And if you have a member who hasn't paid you, then obviously everybody else in the club has kind of subsidized that. We talked about the invoices that are due to the district and also to RI for those dues. If you're participating in RILA, Patty's got down here that there's a payment that's due in May of each year. Hopefully we're gonna be able to do RILA again, Rich, right? And then, like I said, when it comes to the pass-throughs, so the Polio Plus money, the Paul Harris sustaining, any of those kinds of things that you're paying through on behalf of your members, you can do those more infrequently. We do them quarterly just because it's easier to kind of keep track of all of that. All right, you're probably, if you are the treasurer, I mean, I hope you have some kind of financial background or some access to someone who does. Patty has supplied us some just examples. Here's what this is clearly, those of you who have worked with Quicken recognize the format. So here's a balance sheet that shows you all of your assets. It shows you all your liabilities. And then obviously hopefully the positive balance represents the equity that the club has. You may have one of these for your club. You may have another one for your charities or your club foundation or your 501c3, whatever that is. This is really, really difficult to read, but basically this is, all of your income on the top, all of your expenses on the bottom. Hopefully this is done in a format where you can compare it to that budget that hopefully you had your board approve before you started tracking your expenses for the month of July. So you can, go through this, hopefully send it out to your board prior to the board meeting every month. And then this is what you use as your tool to track, obviously, what your cash flow look like, what are our funds on hand, do we have enough to meet the ongoing obligations of the club, and then how are we tracking against those plans that we set out at the beginning of the year. Hopefully this is not something new to folks that are on this call. The tax return, this is the federal tax return for not-for-profit, has to be sent in by, maybe there's another slide here, sorry. Here's the dates. Okay, so this is what your federal 990 looks like. This is your club's annual tax return. This is the charitable, basically this is your permission to go solicit funds as a charitable organization. This has to be filed with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. This is your Florida Department of State annual report. I tell you, if you don't do anything else, well, you got to do it all. But this is the one that really crushes you if you don't do it. It's got to be in by May 1st every year. If not, to get back in good standing with the state, it's a $400 late fee. And that tells you that they're serious about you sending this in. Here's some reminders about the dates. The 990, the Rotary year, right, runs from July 1 to June 30th. So typically in the federal income tax world, you have to file that return on the 15th day of the 5th month. That's typically November. And it can be extended up to 6 months if you need to do that. So be aware of that date. Your solicitation of contributions is an annual renewal, as we said, annual report that's done through Sunbiz. If you have an employee, the W-2, W-3, 940, your payroll tax returns all have to be submitted by January 31st. The 1099 is the form you give to the vendor. The 1096 is the summary report that you file as the club treasurer. That has to be filed with the IRS by January 31st. RT6, as we said, that's your state unemployment tax return. That has to be submitted on a quarterly basis. And so I know I've gone through this really fast. And I think to Jim's request, we'll get copies of the slides out to everybody. But I wanted to leave some time for questions, hopefully, as well. So, you know, here's the thing, wrapping it all up, right? You know, Patty, I think she's making significant emphasis on this because it really is important. So much of your dues information is driven off of your membership. So make sure that that information is accurate, particularly at the end of those quarters, the end of the second quarter and the end of the fourth quarter. The invoices from Rotary International District are due and payable on receipt. They're not adjustable. Apparently this happens, which is why Patty's reminded us of this, is make sure that you're checking your spam filter. If you have any questions, that is my email address. You can also reach Patty at rotaryexecsec@aol.com. And I also just kind of threw this up here. There are some resources on rotary.org, and there is a URL here. You might be able to either take a picture of it, or I'm going to send this to you. It looks like, let me show you what this looks like. If you go to RI, there is a learning plan that is Club Treasurer Basics, and it's an hour and 15 minutes. I've kind of blown through it pretty quickly, but I think it's worth your while. In just, again, don't know what your familiarity is, certainly with the way the Rotary world works, but would suggest that you take a little bit of time to go through this as well. So that's the formal presentation. Rich, let me see. Did everybody get that last?
Yep, we have a
Did everybody
couple.
get that last one? Okay.
We have a couple questions. Jim has his hand raised again. Let's start with Jim.
Yep.
When you're saying make sure we have the membership correct, people are still using Club Runner. We've got the DAC-DB, and obviously, what are you looking for us to? Does it matter as long as we have RI correct?
My understanding, now some of these, I haven't been a treasurer for about 4 or 5 years now, maybe longer than that. Some of this has changed since I was a treasurer, but RI's information, and I believe, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, that information is driven off of RI, right, for the district as well. So if you have a different sort, if you're using DAC-DB, it's all good because DAC-DB now integrates with RI very smoothly. But if you're using something other than DAC-DB, then you have to make sure that, sorry, Rich.
I stopped the share just because
Gotcha.
I thought we can always go pull it back up if there's something specific.
You got it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure you hadn't dropped me off the cliff.
No, I wouldn't do that.
So yeah, just make sure that RI, if you're using a source other than DAC-DB to track your membership, that the information on RI is correct and up to date. And I would not wait till June 30th and December 31st to do that. I don't know exactly when RI goes to grab that information, but I'd say good practice would be to have all that information up to date by the beginning of that month at the latest.
And just as a follow-up, using Club Runner, we used to get emails constantly about disconnects where they were comparing the information on Club Runner to RI. We're just about to convert over to DAC-DB. Does anybody have any idea whether or not they have those same issues?
This is
I think I
Lynn.
can speak. Well, Lynn actually is our expert here. She's going to be leading the 3 o'clock. So why don't I defer to you?
Actually, you can look at it at any time you want in your My Club. All you have to do is click on your RI member compare, and you can see any differences that are between you and RI, and it's a side-by-side comparison. So that's it. You could check that every day if you want. So there's no reason for it to be out of date.
Let me just expand on that. Lynn's being very diplomatic. In my opinion, and that's what it is, the Club Runner is kind of dying on the vine. I don't think they're giving a lot of updates. They're not writing new program. They're not writing new code. It's kind of going to be what it is. Our club a couple years ago made the transition from Club Runner to DACDB. Couldn't be happier, and did it pretty painlessly. The folks at DACDB are willing to help you with that, but also we have in the district, Jimmy Z, Carolyn Mudgett, my beautiful bride Marie, all pretty savvy and can help a club walk through that transition to a DACDB platform. And we can't make clubs do that, but I'm encouraging everybody, if we could all be on one platform, it would make life so much easier for us and for the club itself. I think you'll find that you know, I get it, change is hard, but it really wasn't that difficult of a transition for us, and I think it's well worth it. Jim, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, what is the mix in the district as far as clubs using one versus the other?
I don't have a handle. There was 63 clubs. I bet there's still 10 or so that have Club Runner. There may be a couple that don't use anything at all. I guess. I don't know for sure. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of us are at this point are on DACDB. Anything else on that topic? We can move on to some questions that were out here in the chat room. Roseanne, let's see.
So my question was regarding the $100 donation to the Rotary Foundation. We used to put that on our invoices for every member, and we were told that you couldn't do that, that it had to be down as a recommended thing because it's a donation. So, and I know you said that your club bills it. So is that okay? Can we legally put that you have to donate $100 a year if you want to be part of our club, or do we have to have that recommended donation on the invoice?
You know, it depends on kind of what you have and the expectations that you've set on the invoices that we send in our club. We have a couple of different things that we've made very clear to folks are voluntary. Now, when we bring people in and we do the fireside chat, et cetera, we tell them, look, we're 100% Paul Harris Club. We expect our members to be sustaining members on a regular basis. If somebody really objected to that, I don't suppose we would kick them out of the club for doing that. You really can't do that. But on our invoice, we make it clear that that is part of their Paul Harris sustaining membership, that $25. And then, of course, I thought you were asking me a different question when you started, but you realize you have to go through RI or Rotary.org to make that payment online. You don't get a separate bill for that. You basically initiate that payment after you've collected those funds. But anything like that, you know, we just delineate it on the bill. Here's your meals. Here is your, you know, your club dues for social, et cetera. Here's your district dues and RI dues. Here is your Paul Harris sustaining member. And then we have a major fundraising project every year that we put on there as an additional contribution. And we have a few people who opt out occasionally, but I would say that's a very, very small number. So I think you're right. I don't think you can mandate it. But again, you say, you know, in the spirit of what we're doing here, you know, there's kind of an expectation that people will participate.
I think that's right, John. If you're if you talk to RI staff and this question's been asked, our clubs, you know, Maria is the current president. She goes to a lot of these meetings with me. And RI staff will tell you that you cannot just invoice these people monthly or quarterly for a donation. So you, John, again, correct, you manage expectations, right? You tell them, a new member coming in, this is what we do. We give, you know, $12 a month to the Rotary Foundation in our club. That's what we do. 144 a year, and we collect that and we send it up to the foundation. It's not a dues, and it's line item on our invoice. It says, you know, Paul Harris Society or Paul Harris annual fund contribution $12. They could opt out of it. It's the communication. So it's one of those things. There's very few Rotary, requirements, laws. This is one of those areas that, you know, there's no Rotary police. We just kind of do the right thing. You know, communicate them. It is a donation. It is your money. We can't make you do it, but this is who we are as a club. And I think that's how I would handle it. Anybody else thoughts or experience with that?
What other questions do we have out there, Rich?
So the one, any clubs do a monthly auto pay, like my real estate dues, utilities, cable, etc. Can you just put it on autopilot?
Yeah, you can. If you are comfortable with the technology, and this is something, you know, that our club has struggled with in the past. A lot of the credit cards and some of the auto pay and some of those things were really expensive 10 years ago. They've gotten a lot cheaper and they've gotten easier to do. But as long as it's something that your board is comfortable with, that you as the treasurer are comfortable with the mechanism, and that your, you know, members are comfortable with how to use it. And again, you need to understand the cost. You need to understand, you know, do you need to provide alternatives to your members? And usually that's the case. You could sort of mandate and again say everybody's going to do this. You know, you have to decide, you know, within your own club, the wisdom of doing that. But if you want to set something up on an auto draft and you guys can manage the mechanics of it, there's no reason why you can't do it. Hopefully that answers the question.
Hey, John,
Yes, sir.
can I make a comment? We have probably 3 or 4 members in our club that are essentially on auto pay. And the only problem sometimes that comes up is if they overpay or they miss something, then we have to go back and do some credits, but otherwise it's pretty easy. And bank transfers are only 1% through QuickBooks anyway, in terms of a cost to the club. It's pretty small.
Anybody else out there have any experience with that? I mean, Bo is the treasurer of our club this year and did a really good job of automating a lot of these things through Quicken. Is that right, Bo? So
It's actually through, actually through QuickBooks.
QuickBooks, excuse me.
Yeah, and it is, once you get it set up, it's pretty much on autopilot.
I don't know, Rich, was there, I mean, I just saw someone, I think Dean actually just asked about credit card fees. That's interesting, you know, because that's a discussion that, you know, when we first started, we didn't take credit cards for a long time because of that. And then, because there was some difficulty with passing on the fee. And then we, for a while, we're adding the additional service fee onto the invoice and basically charging it to the member as a convenience fee. And then we got it down to, again, I think Bo got it down to a really small number. And we had plenty of reserves built up in the club. And we just said, look, you know, the club's going to eat the $5 a quarter or whatever it was for that credit card processing fee. But again, it just depends on how you set up the billing. If people paid by check, then the treasurer would need to credit off, obviously, the service charge that you were charging. So it's just a matter of how much additional record keeping and bookkeeping you need to do. But we decided it was easier for us, more convenient for the members to pay by credit card. And we said, we're going to eat the $5 a month or $5 a quarter, excuse me, whatever that was. Is that accurate, Bo?
It is actually, and it's a little bit more depending if it's Visa or Amex, but it averages about almost $9 for a credit card for what we charge on our dues. But the bank transfer, you know, is 1%. So it's like, it's under $3. So like you said, we decided as a club, it was worth it just for the convenience of the members. Plus, it took a lot of burden off of me, which I was really in favor of.
And we get paid a lot quicker too.
Absolutely.
So we do have Mark from DACDB teaching the next treasurer segment. And that is an opportunity in DACDB. They have a financial module that can address that kind of a program. The other thing that I would add, our club emails all our invoices out, and there's a link that you can just go right online directly and pay it rather than mail it in. So that, you know, you can opt into that actively, or you can just, you know, traditional bring your dues to the club meeting or mail it in. So that's another way to just deal with it.
We've got, what, about 4 minutes left or so? I mean, unless we've got some other questions, we want to make sure you get a little bit of a break to the 3. Raymond's got his hand up there.
Yeah, I got
Go
one.
ahead. Ray, you need to unmute your.
Yeah,
there
thank
you
you.
go.
Yeah, thanks. Just I guess, if you can share some wisdom or some idea of with this COVID-19 going on and not sure what's going on day to day or month to month, how do you tell a chairperson, how do I budget for the year? I don't know what's happening. We don't know what could happen in, you know, the summertime, the wintertime. Any ideas of what's the best way to, when I know you got the unknown, do you hope for the best and plan for the worst, or how's this? I'm not a treasurer, so just trying to understand.
Right. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you what, we got time for a whole session on that one, Rich, right? Trying to plan for the, plan for the unknown, the known unknowns, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to be the most probably difficult year. I thought you were going to ask me the question about what did we do with, we were charging a certain level of dues. Well, we're not meeting, and so we're not being charged for breakfasts. And really briefly, what we did is we made it optional to all of our members and said, well, if you want to just go ahead and make that regular contribution, we meet at Club Continental. A couple of their folks have been laid off, and there's one gal who's got a couple kids and she's had to move in with her parents. And so we had a number of our members just say, look, I'm going to send in my full amount, take the money that we're not spending on breakfast, and let's help her out. So what I would probably say is, look, plan for a normal year, plan for the known knowns, and then make sure you have contingencies built into your budget. Obviously, the expense contingencies are fairly easy because chances are you're not going to spend money for certain things if you can't go back to meeting normally. And then you just have to adjust your income accordingly. But if you start out with your top line budget, which would be based on, I've got 50 members at this quarterly cost, and that's my top number. Now I may have to build in contingency for that and saying, well, if I'm not going to meet again until the fall, what does that mean to that number? Well, it's going to make your job a little more difficult this year because you got to think ahead a little bit about, well, the meal part's easy. If I don't get charged for any meals, then I don't have that expense. But I don't know, the thing we're struggling right now is our big fundraiser that we do every year, which raises all the money for our 501c3. We've had to cancel it because it's a lot of people, and it was going to originally be in May, pushed it to June. Now we know the social distancing, basically guidelines aren't going to be lifted in time for us to have it. So if you have a major fundraiser or a big social gathering like that planned for the fall, I'd say you probably have to have a contingency built into your budget that you're probably not going to have it. Does that help, Ray? All right, thumbs up. I like it.
So one other comment on that. At the district level, we went through an exercise realizing that we weren't spending money on district conference, district assembly. We weren't traveling. 4 of us were not going to Hawaii that were previously identified in the budget. And so we did that exercise. We've already collected all the dues for the year. So we identified what we thought was a surplus at the end of the year that we're going to end up with. And in my budget, which has been approved, it's been approved by the finance committee, but it needs to go to the president-elects on May 16th. But assuming it's approved, we have dropped the dues down. We've taken out the $10 that would normally be assigned to the district conference. So 3,300 Rotarians $10. So there's 33,000 that we're transferring from this year into next year. So that would basically be our base for district conference expenses. And of course, there's registration that bridges the difference. Typical conference costs about $70,000. So that's an exercise. We're passing on the savings that we can to the clubs. I'm pretty sure that'll be approved, and we're doing it at the district level, and the clubs need to do it at the club level, right? Just like we do in our household when we're planning for things. So just wanted to let you guys know we are aware of those things.
Rich, I saw a hand, Mr. DuPont. I saw a hand up.
Just right
Yeah,
here.
mute myself. I was just going to tell you, we're doing something along similar to that regarding the meal cost. The board approved it. We're going to send the amount that we're paying normally for the food to our caterer, and we've got a group of servers, and we're going to fund them, and then the rest of it, like 50% of it, the other 50%, we're just going to let the restaurant put in their fund as kind of our community service for the COVID. But as far as budgeting for this next year, it's going to be a major problem. Just like you're talking about fundraising. Our golf tournament was April 1st. We shoved it forward. We have a date in September. Everybody has said they continue with their support us. We haven't really had any refunds. And but our other fundraiser in the fall, our casino night, probably won't happen. It's going to be very interesting. Budgeting.
All right, so it looks like, Rich, I'm getting the hook. So,
Yep.
but we'll get a list of all the club treasurers. We'll get the presentation out to you. And again, my email address is jtabor1 1@comcast.net. Feel free to reach out. I think you can probably find me with Orange Park Sunrise as well. And good luck, everyone.
Okay. I'm just generating, we're a raffle ticket winner, and the number is going to be number 2. So we will compile an email of the winning people based on the attendance, and number will be assigned randomly to one of the participants, and we'll get you a $25 gift certificate to your favorite local restaurant. John, thank you so much, and thank you all for attending. I'm going to leave this call open. Let's take a comfort break and see you folks back here right at 3 o'clock then.